December 2013. A red carpet in New York. Flashbulbs. The premiere of a film about a stockbroker who lies, steals, and gets away with almost everything. A film that would go on to earn an Academy Award nomination for Best Picture. Almost nobody in that theater had reason to know that roughly $100 million of the money that financed it had been stolen from a government development fund on the other side of the world. That's not the twist of this story. That's the method. Because the story you think you know about 1MDB, a mysterious financier who stole billions and vanished, is the wrong story. Money that looks stolen is a liability. Money that looks like taste is invisible. A superyacht isn't a place to hide $250 million. It's a receipt. So is a painting. So it turns out, is a movie starring one of the most famous actors alive. And the man who built this laundering machine isn't even the traitor at the center of it. That title belongs to someone who was elected to serve his own country and let $700 million of its money land in his personal bank account. Rewind to 2009. Najib Razak has just become Prime Minister of Malaysia, and he launches something called One Malaysia Development Berhad, 1MDB for short. On paper, it's a sovereign wealth fund, state money, meant to attract foreign investment and modernize the country's economy. Energy projects, real estate, strategic partnerships. Around Najib sits a young financier named Low Tak Jo, known to almost everyone simply as Joe Low. He isn't a government official. He doesn't run 1MDB, but he is close to Najib's family, close to Najib's stepson, Riza Aziz, and by his early 30s, he has made himself the man who quietly arranges things, deals, introductions, financing, for people with real power. 1MDB gives him his opening. Here's the part almost nobody explains well. 1MDB wasn't robbed in one heist. It was drained through years of ordinary-looking finance. In 2009, 1MDB entered a joint venture with the Saudi-linked private oil company, Petro Saudi International. Thereafter, billions of dollars raised through bond offerings, some of them arranged with the help of a major Wall Street investment bank, flowed not fully into the energy and development projects they were sold to fund, but partly through opaque intermediary companies with almost no real operations. One of them, a shell company called Good Star Limited, was, investigators would later allege, effectively controlled by Joe Low himself. By the time auditors and journalists began asking real questions, at least $4.5 billion tied to 1MDB had moved through this kind of structure. And here's the method again. The money didn't stay in an account somewhere waiting to be found. It kept moving until it stopped looking like stolen government money at all. Because that's where it went next. Out into the open, dressed as glamour. A $250 million superyacht, later named Equanimity. Fine art, a Basquiat, a Monet, bought at auction under other people's names. Tens of millions of dollars in jewelry, some of it gifted to a well-known supermodel. Parties in Las Vegas and the south of France, with performers flown in for a single night. A mansion in Beverly Hills, an interest in a Manhattan hotel. None of this was hidden. It was the opposite of hidden. It was published, photographed, admired. That's what made it work. If you're finding this useful, a like genuinely helps this reach people who'd want to see it. And then there's the piece of the story that sounds almost too neat to be true. Riza Aziz co-founded a film production company, Red Granite Pictures. In 2013, prosecutors would later allege roughly $100 million traced back to 1MDB helped finance one of that studio's biggest productions, a film about a real-life conman who cheated investors out of a fortune and, for years, faced no real consequences for it. It premiered on that red carpet. It was nominated for 5 Academy Awards. And for years, almost no one watching it had any idea where $100 million of its budget had actually come from. But here is the turn this story has to make, because this is where the real betrayal sits. In 2015, investigators traced roughly $700 million, moving from entities linked to 1MDB into the personal Malaysian bank accounts of Najib Razak, the sitting Prime Minister. When the transfers became public, his office said it was a personal donation from a member of the Saudi royal family, with most of it later reportedly returned. Prosecutors and investigators in multiple countries alleged otherwise. Joe Low built the machine, but Najib Razak was the elected head of that government, and investigators say he let the machine feed him directly. That is not a financier hiding money offshore. That is a sitting Prime Minister with money moving straight into his own name. And for a while it worked, because the people investigating it worked for him. Malaysia's own anti-corruption task force began looking into the transfers in 2015. Within months, the Attorney General leading the inquiry was replaced. A Deputy Prime Minister, who'd asked pointed questions publicly, was removed from government. Journalists and outlets who reported on the missing money, including the independent site Sarawak Report, were labelled a threat to national security, and access to their reporting was blocked inside the country. The Prime Minister didn't need to hide the evidence. He controlled the people whose job it was to find it. But 1MDB wasn't only a Malaysian story anymore. The bond offerings, the shell companies, and the Hollywood money had all touched the international financial system: the United States, Switzerland, Singapore, Luxembourg. And in those countries, nobody answered to Najib Razak. The Wall Street Journal published detailed reporting on the $700 million transfer in 2015. Singapore and Swiss regulators opened their own investigations into local banks that had processed 1MDB-linked money. And in 2016, the United States Department of Justice filed civil forfeiture actions to seize more than $1 billion in assets it said had been bought with stolen 1MDB funds. At the time, the largest action ever brought under its kleptocracy asset recovery initiative. The yacht, the art, the Beverly Hills mansion, the rights to that film. All of it named, in American court filings, as the proceeds of a crime. In May 2018, Malaysians voted Najib Razak's coalition out of power for the first time in the nation's history as an independent country, a result driven, in large part, by public fury over 1MDB. The new government reopened the books at home. Najib was arrested weeks later. He stood trial in Malaysia on dozens of charges connected to 1MDB. In 2020, in the first of those cases to reach verdict, involving a 1MDB-linked unit called SRC International, he was convicted of criminal breach of trust, abuse of power, and money laundering, and sentenced to 12 years in prison. His final appeal failed in 2022, and he was sent to begin serving that sentence. Piece by piece, the glamour came back. The superyacht, Equanimity, was seized off the coast of Indonesia in 2018, and later sold, with the proceeds returned to Malaysia. Much of the art was recovered. Red Granite Pictures reached a settlement with the US Department of Justice, agreeing to pay tens of millions of dollars while denying wrongdoing. Malaysian authorities have recovered well over $1 billion in cash and assets tied to the scandal. Joe Low himself has never been arrested. Malaysian and American authorities have charged him in absentia on multiple counts, and his whereabouts remain unverified. Some investigative reporting alleges years spent in China, unconfirmed by any government. So here's what almost every retelling of this story gets backwards. It treats 1MDB as a manhunt, a mystery about a financier nobody can find. But the money was never really hidden. It was hidden in plain sight, dressed as taste, admired at parties and film premieres by people who had no idea what they were looking at. Hiding stolen money takes a genius. Getting people to applaud it takes something else entirely. An insider. Someone with the authority to make it all look legitimate in the first place. Joe Low built the machine, but the machine only worked because the head of a government let it run through his own hands, then used the power of the state itself to protect it. That's not a heist. That is a country's own leadership deciding its development fund existed to develop them. For more stories about power, fraud, and the people who were supposed to protect the public from it, subscribe to Tycoons and Traitors. The Fugitive made the headlines. The insider made the theft possible. The yacht came home. The art came home. Even some of the money came home. The system just never quite caught up to the man who signed for all of it.